Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about finance and relationships. So Equifax has 50 questions that you should ask your partners, and each of these questions are broken out into 4 different sections. The first section is spending, saving, and budgeting questions. The second section is debt and credit questions. The third section is children and family questions. And the fourth section is retirement and investing questions. So today we're going to be focusing on mainly the first set of questions, which is spending, saving, and budgeting questions. As we go through the questions, I will be reading out the question, I'll be providing any definitions, I will rate the question, and I'll give you my honest thoughts on each of the questions. So let's dive right into it. So the first question is, are you more of a spender or a saver? So a spender is someone who's classified as someone who spends money, whether it's on expenses or frivolous spending, and effectively just wants to spend a lot of money. And then we also have someone who's a saver, who tends to be more of a person who like hides money under their mattress, keeps money in the bank, and just loves to put money away. So this first question, I would rate it as a must ask for your partner. I am the belief that, for example, if you are a saver, then you should be going for someone who's your opposite. So essentially, like if you're a saver, you should be going for someone who's a spender, and the vice versa. If you're a spender yourself, you should definitely be going for someone who's a saver. And the reason for that is because someone who's a saver will tend to want to put away as money as much as possible, but they won't live the best life experiences. And the same thing for a spender. A spender will constantly spend all their money, but never have anything to invest or actually build for their future. So essentially, it's important for this dynamic to be, in check, so that way you have the best of both worlds. Someone who spends on experiences and other expenses, and someone who actually saves and invests in your future. So this is why I believe this is an important question. So let's move on to the next question. Do you keep a monthly budget? So the definition of a budget is basically a list of all your income and your expenses. Usually it's itemized based on the type of expense or the type of income that you have. So now, how would I rate this question? I would personally say this question is not important. And the reason for that is because a budget in most cases can be done mentally. You can keep track of your own income and expenses because most people only have one income. So it doesn't make sense to create a detailed budget for that kind of stuff. So in most cases, a budget is not necessary in your relationship, and you should not have a budget unless you have an extensive history of many incomes and a lot of expenses. So yeah, that's what I believe for this one, and that's why I classify this as not important at all. So let's move on to the next question. What is your annual income? So an income is basically, where do you derive your money from? Do you derive it from like your job, from dividends, from stocks? There's many different ways of deriving income for people. Most people have income from their jobs. Now, how would I rate this question? So depending on where you are in your relationship, you can actually rate this question 2 ways. So if you are just meeting your partner and you're not married or not getting close to marriage, I would say I would rate this question as important. However, if you're someone that's about to get married or already married, then this question actually becomes a must ask. And I'll give you the reason for each. So the reason that it becomes important when you're, before marriage is because it's not something that is 100% needed to ensure the relationship works. But it is important to understand because that can impact your long-term relationship with the person. How well you're going to be doing in the relationship, whether you can go out as much, for example, go out to dinners and things like that. And also sometimes it can be a little bit off-putting kind of asking this question. And I personally am not someone who likes to be asked this question. So depending on your partner, this would actually be a question that could ultimately ruin your relationship potentially. But it is all altogether important. However, when you become married, though, this becomes a must ask because you end up joining your finances and becoming one person, essentially. And you're actually filing jointly, usually on your tax returns. You're also thinking about maybe having kids in the future. So all of these aspects actually contribute to it becoming a must-ask question. So for the purposes of this, though, I personally would probably be in the as it becoming important more than anything, because in most cases you're just probably starting off your relationship and not in the marriage phase. So what are my thoughts on this question? So the annual income is something that is pivotal to a relationship, because this determines overall your lifestyle, how much you can invest in your future, whether it's buying a house, whether it's buying a car, having enough for day-to-day expenses, going on vacation. All of these aspects will be funded by your income in most cases. So it's important to really understand the stability that you and your partner have, because there could be a point where maybe one of you or both of you lose your jobs. So it's important to see if the income of one person can effectively stabilize both people, at least for a period of time. So income becomes essential in a relationship. Alrighty, so let's move on to the next question. How much money do you typically spend each month? Now, how would I rate this question? So this question, I would actually rate it as somewhat important. And the reason for that is because it's not really how much your partner spends, it's where your partner is spending the money. Because some people might spend, how much money, a lot of money maybe on their rent or other aspects of their life, but it'll be essential things that they need to actually spend. What's more important is the composition of where the money is going than anything. So that's why I classified this question as somewhat important versus important. So what are my thoughts on this question? So what's really important to understand is, yes, how much does your partner spend each month? Whether it's $1,000, $5,000, $10,000. But then looking at the pie chart, where are these expenses being allocated towards? Rent, food, entertainment. Really understanding the different verticals of where the money is being spent is probably the most essential aspect of the money that's being spent each month. So it's important to really understand that of your partner, of where the money is going. Alrighty, so let's move on to the next question.
Hello everyone, my name is Anthony and I'm the host of TheLostSanctuary. I hope you've been enjoying our content so far, and if you have, please feel free to like and subscribe. Also, we have our website up here, and we also have some socials down here. And as always, leave your comments down below.
How do you typically spend your disposable income? So, disposable income is essentially anything you have that's effectively superfluous income, which basically just means money that you can effectively just spend without any repercussions. So usually not a lot of people have disposable income, but if you do, essentially it just means that anything that's left over from after you pay all your rent, your food, all your utilities, pretty much everything that you have. So that portion would be considered disposable income. Now, how would I rate this question? So I personally would rate this as a don't ask question, and I'll explain why. The reason I would rate this as a don't ask question is because usually disposable income is something that's above everything that's needed to operate the household. So essentially, it's essentially everything that's left over after everything is done, all split up. And yeah, so the money that your partner spends on their hobbies or things that they enjoy in life shouldn't be scrutinized by you. It should, especially if they're not doing anything wrong and they're just using it as fulfillment. It's important to really understand that disposable income is for the enjoyment of either the sole partner or both of you. So it's important to not really dig into too much of the disposable income, especially if they're not doing anything that's wrong in the first place and it's just like for a hobby or something. Alrighty, so let's move on to the next question. What's the most money you've ever spent at one time? So how would I rate this question? I would say this question is not important at all. And the reason for that is because just because someone has one large purchase doesn't really define their spending habits. So sometimes people will have things that they want in life. So this would be maybe like a car or a house. And these would be considered very sizable purchases. but you can't really define someone just based on that one large purchase that they do. So essentially, that's why I feel like this question is not important at all, because you can't really define your partner based on these one transactions. So it's essentially trying to define a person by one aspect or one history that they have. So I think this question is not important for your relationship. What's important is to really control the smaller transactions than the one large transaction that they've ever had in their entire life. So that's my belief on this question, and yeah, that's all I'll say on this one. Alrighty, so on to the next question. Do you feel it's important to ask for my permission before making a large purchase? So I would actually rephrase this question to say, do you need your partner's consultation before you make a large purchase? And depending on what stage you are in your relationship, this will depict whether you should ask for consultation. How would I rate this question? I would say this question is somewhat important. So depending on where you are in the stage of your relationship, this could be very impactful. So if you are already married and you're effectively one unit, then yes, you should definitely consult your partner before you make a large purchase. And this could be like buying a house, buying a car, or making a large investment in like in the stock market, for example. It's important to really consult your partner, because depending on where you are in depending on like what goals you have as marriage partners, you really want to make sure you're both aligned on this. Now, if you're and then the next portion would be more like, let's say you are in a pretty serious relationship and you're thinking about purchasing something. So if you already have something planned, for example, as I mentioned, like maybe buying a car or buying a house, then it is also important for you to consult your partner on these matters as well. Because if you make a large purchase, this may derail your entire plan of buying that one item or making that investment. So if you are in a serious relationship, it's important also to consider, asking for consultation from your significant other. Now, let's say you're in the early stages of your relationship, though. It's not really necessary that you consult your significant other in this piece, but it is important that you do consult someone, because buying that significant purchase could actually impact your relationship in the long run. Because if you make an incorrect purchase or a large purchase that ends up being a large burden on you, it may bleed into your relationship. So it's important to ask a friend, a family member, or a financial advisor before you make a large purchase, and to see how that impacts your future goals of either investing or making a future with your partner. Alrighty, so let's move on to the next question. Which expenses would you cut to reduce your total spending? So, how would I rate this question? So I would rate this question as somewhat important. And the reason for that is because you don't want someone who isn't willing to make sacrifices for your relationship. So for example, someone who has 20 subscriptions to different types of services, they probably don't need all 20 of those subscriptions. So maybe they can cut maybe 3 to 5 of them, and they would still be able to comfortably have a good viewing or listening experience, for example. Another aspect that sometimes people tend to cut is maybe going out to eat, which is a very large expense for some people. So that would be like dining out or going to fast food restaurants. Sometimes it's important to make sacrifices and maybe cook at home, because depending on what goals you have in the relationship, you do need to make sacrifices and cut things and really make snippets here and there, because in the long run, these will contribute to the financial future of you and your significant other. Alrighty, let's move on to the next question. Would you prefer to split utilities and other expenses equally or according to our income? Utilities, just to define it, is basically anything like an electric bill, your phone bill, your internet bill. All of these aspects contribute to a utility bill in essence. So now, how would I rate this question? I would actually rate this question a must ask for your partner. And the reason for that is because usually at this stage of your relationship, if you're thinking about splitting expenses or utilities, you might be thinking about moving in together. So it's important for you guys to come to a mutual understanding with each other. Basically saying like, yes, we're going to split it 50-50, or we're going to split it based on a proportion of our income. And the reason for that is because you want to make sure that once you actually do move forward and move in together, everything is set in stone and you know effectively who's going to be contributing for what factor. And yeah, that's why it's very important. And overall, that does beat the alternative of, if you're single and you're paying 100% of these expenses. So overall, it's important to just make a compromise and just know that it's better than paying all of these on your own. Alrighty, so moving on to the next question. Should we open a joint bank account or keep our money separate? So a joint bank account is basically an account where basically two or more people have access to the account. You can actually put money into the account, or you can actually remove money from the account as well. So how would I rate this question? I would rate this question as somewhat important, because depending on where you are in your relationship, you could be having a system that is already working. So for example, you have a system where you've already agreed whether you're going to split expenses 50-50 or if you're going to be splitting expenses based on your income. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need a joint account to actually continue the system. And if it's already working where all of your bills are getting paid, everyone's happy with the arrangement, a joint account would just add something that's unnecessary to the relationship. In most cases, a joint account would probably be beneficial if a major life event were to occur. And this would include maybe someone having being out of a job due to maybe them being fired, for example, or maybe the person just leaves the workforce because they want to maybe be a stay-at-home parent. These scenarios might then warrant a joint account, so that way your significant other would have access to some funds for them to continue the operations of the house, whether it's buying groceries or paying bills while you're out there being the breadwinner. Alrighty, so let's move on to the next question. How much do you save on a monthly basis? So I would rate this question as somewhat important. And the reason for that is because usually, as rule of thumb, in most cases, each person should save at least 10% of their income. So if your partner is not saving at least 10% of your income, it's important to really make sure that they have, you look at where they're allocating their monthly expenses, and if they can actually start carving out for monthly savings. So, this kind of relates back to our other question where do you actually spend your money? Because depending on where your partner spends their money will contribute to whether or not they can actually save each month. So this is why it's important to keep track of, where your partner, actually spends their money, so that way you can have a joint savings. Alright, so let's move on to the next question. Do you keep an emergency savings fund? So, just to define what an emergency savings fund is, basically, usually this is 3 to 6 months of your income, regardless of how much you earn every month, and this should be able to cover 3 to 6 months of your expenses. And this is usually used to cover if you, God forbid, lose your job, or any event occurs, whether like your car breaks down. So this is why it's important to have an emergency fund. So, how would I rate this question? I would rate this question as important. And the reason for that is because, having an emergency fund is essential for any time that a crisis happens. So there's going to be unfortunate events where sometimes your partner is laid off from their job. Sometimes there's things that happen, like maybe you have a child that's on the way. All of these important factors contribute to having an emergency savings fund. Especially if you can have 3 to 6 months, it's the rule of thumb in most cases. And you can even start with something as small as just having $1,000 in your account to kind of start it off. So yeah, that's why an emergency savings fund is important, because you don't want to be in a situation where you don't have enough money to sustain yourself while you find your next job. Alrighty, so moving on to the next question. How do you maintain your long-term savings? So I would rate this question as don't ask, because in all honesty, this is a dumb question. In most cases, you maintain long-term savings by putting your money into it, your income. And in most cases, that's from your job. So you don't really have a lot of income sources in most cases, so you just maintain your long-term savings through the income you get from your job. So that's why I feel like this is a don't ask question. Alrighty, so moving on to the next question. What are your long-term financial goals? So how would I rate this question? I would rate this question as important. And the reason for that is because depending on your partner's answer of what their long-term financial goals are, will actually determine the extent of how comfortably you can live for the rest of your life. So essentially, depending on like what they say of what their long-term financial goals are, whether it's buying a house, investing in maybe a dividend giving fund, it's important to really understand where your partner's head is at when they have long-term financial goals, because that will determine how comfortably you live in your prime years when you're no longer working. So that's why it's important to understand the long-term financial goals of your partner. Alrighty, so moving on to the next question. What would you do if you received lottery winnings, an inheritance, or any other unexpected windfall? Now, how would I rate this question? I would say this question is a don't ask. And the reason for that is because if you're already married and in a a loving relationship already, it's already determined that you will be sharing no matter what comes into the relationship. Whether it's an inheritance, lottery winnings, or any unexpected windfall, you will be sharing this, and it's going to be part of the unity that you've already created with your partner. Now, what if you're not married and this happens to you? In this kind of situation, it's kind of a polarizing question because you probably won't get the answer that you're looking for in most cases. So if your partner has like ill intent towards you, they probably won't be honest with their answer, and it's a hypothetical in most cases. So they probably would just give the answer that will be most suited for you, and they'll definitely put in some honey words here and there for you to make it sound like nothing will go wrong. But if the person has good intentions, they will respond truthfully and will tell you their response. But in most cases, whether it's a hypothetical or actually happens, will determine the response that your partner has. So in my honest opinion, just don't ask this question. It's not going to really benefit your relationship in the long run. And that concludes our last question. So we successfully have gone through the spending, saving, and budgeting questions of the Equifax questionnaire. On our next week's episode, we're actually going to discuss the debt and credit questions. And we also have the children and family questions, as well as the retirement and investment questions. So I want to thank you all for joining me for this episode, and I appreciate your time. I hope everyone has a great day. Adios. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing an amazing job, and I'm wishing everyone out there all the best. All right, until next time, adios.